In the silence of the hospital room, Noah Donovan, a 24-year-old young man, lay motionless, surrounded by machines monitoring every beat of his heart. The doctors had lost hope. The devastating accident had left little chance of recovery. However, the Noah that everyone knew was not someone easy to forget. Before the coma, he had become a successful businessman, known for his fierce ambition and hardened heart. Noah had grown up with everything money could buy, but from an early age, his passion was to accumulate more. He always knew that success wouldn't be handed to him on a silver platter, and despite being an heir to a fortune, he wanted to be recognized for his own achievements. At 20, he founded his own tech company, which within a few years had become a lucrative empire. However, along with success came a coldness that frightened even those who admired him. Noah became known for his ruthlessness in business and his lack of empathy toward others. Noah's heart was hard, especially with his own family. He distanced himself from his brothers, the children from his father Edward Donovan's first marriage, and maintained no close relationship with them. He considered them weak, more interested in their father's inheritance than in building something of their own. This caused many conflicts and estrangement over the years. Now, in the shadows of that room, the man everyone feared in the business world was silent, unable to defend himself or fight. Edward Donovan, his father, stood by the bedside, watching his son with sad, tired eyes. Edward was also in his own battle, fighting cancer that he knew he wouldn't survive. The illness was progressing rapidly, and he didn't have much time left. Daily visits to the hospital weakened him more each day, not only physically but also emotionally. He never imagined that life would bring him such a heavy burden. "How did it come to this, Noah?" Edward whispered, his voice hoarse. "So much success, so much determination, and now you lie here, defenseless." Noah was Edward's pride, despite all the hardness his son showed. He saw in Noah a reflection of his own ambition and resilience. Yet, tragedy struck suddenly. After leaving an exhausting business meeting, Noah took his motorcycle to escape the stress. He always said that speed was the only time he felt free. But that night, the wet road and his haste resulted in a terrible accident. Since then, he had been confined to that bed. Edward coughed painfully, a dry cough that tore at his lungs, already consumed by disease. He knew his days were numbered, but he couldn't die in peace without ensuring Noah would be taken care of. His other sons, Mark and John, were impatiently waiting for their father's death to get their hands on the inheritance. Edward knew well their greed. They would never care for Noah, never be concerned for the well-being of their comatose brother. He needed to make a difficult decision, something that could ensure Noah's protection after he was gone. It was then that a cruel and desperate idea came to mind. He needed to find a young woman, someone with a pure heart who could marry Noah and inherit everything, someone who would love him enough to care for him, even if he never woke up. But this young woman would have to be special, not just anyone. Edward stood up with difficulty, feeling the searing pain caused by the illness. He knew what he needed to do. He walked slowly to the hallway and picked up his phone, calling William, his trusted lawyer. "William?" Edward began, his voice tired but determined. "I need you at the hospital. We have something very important to discuss. Something that can't wait." William, on the other end of the line, hesitated for a moment. He knew Edward's condition was serious, and any request from him had to be promptly attended to. "Of course, Mr. Donovan. I'll be there shortly." Edward hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the decision he was about to make. He knew many would judge him, but he was willing to do whatever it took to ensure Noah was protected. Time was against him, and there was no more room for doubt. 2 hours later, William arrived at the hospital. He was a serious man, always with a restrained expression, but upon seeing Edward, he couldn't hide his surprise at how debilitated his client and friend had become. "Mr. Donovan, I came as fast as I could." William approached the hospital bed and shook Edward's hand. "Thank you, William," Edward responded, his voice barely audible. "I need you now more than ever." William sat down next to Edward, attentive. "What's going on, sir? Is there something the doctors haven't told me?" "My time is running out, William. They've given me only a few months, maybe weeks. But that doesn't matter. What matters is Noah." "I understand. The doctors don't believe that he..." William began, but Edward interrupted him with a gesture. No, William, that's not what I'm talking about. I can't leave my fortune in the hands of Mark and John. They're greedy, selfish. They won't care for Noah. They won't care if he rots in that hospital room. William frowned, concerned. And what do you suggest we do? Edward took a deep breath, knowing his words would sound extreme, but he saw no other option. I need you to find a young woman, someone with a pure heart who isn't interested in money, a young woman from a humble family willing to marry Noah. She will inherit everything, but under one condition. She must take care of him until the end, whatever that end may be. William was silent for a few moments, taking in the request. A young woman to marry Noah, even though he's in a coma? Sir, this won't be easy. I know, but it's the only way. I have no other choice. Edward's voice faltered, the weight of the decision overwhelming him. I need to ensure Noah is protected. William sighed, seeing the desperation in Edward's eyes. He knew the request was unusual, but he also knew that if anyone could handle such a delicate task, it would be him. I'll take care of it, sir. I'll do whatever it takes to find the right person. Edward nodded, feeling a small wave of relief. Now, everything was in William's hands. Clara Weston was a 20-year-old young woman living in a small rural town, where green hills and vast horse fields were the backdrop of her everyday life. For many, life in the countryside was monotonous, but for Clara, it was where her dreams grew. She always believed her Prince Charming would arrive on horseback, ready to take her to a future where happiness and love would be as vast as the fields where she spent her afternoons. Since childhood, Clara had always loved horses. Her mother, who had passed away when Clara was just 12 years old, had taught her to love animals and see in them a freedom that few humans possessed. Clara spent hours tending to the horses at the local farm, helping her father to sustain the family. For her, being close to those animals was like living in a fairy tale, where one day she imagined she would be the damsel rescued by a prince on a beautiful white horse. But Clara's reality was far different from her dreams. She lived with her father, James, and her younger sister, Emma, who was 15. Despite her young age, Emma was battling a severe illness. Since her diagnosis, the hope of a cure lay in an expensive surgery the family couldn't afford. This weighed on Clara's heart every day, as more than anything, she wanted to save her sister's life. "Father, we have to do something," Clara often said to James as he struggled to keep their small farm running. "We can't let Emma suffer like this." James, a man with a weary expression, looked at his eldest daughter with eyes full of sadness and guilt. "I know, Clara. I'd give my life to cure her, but we just don't have the means. We're barely surviving, struggling to maintain the basics." His voice was heavy, filled with despair. Clara worked as much as she could. She had a simple job at the local store, helping to support the household and pay for Emma's medical consultations. But her salary wasn't nearly enough to cover the cost of the surgery. Still, Clara never complained. She knew her father was doing everything he could, and she believed, somewhere deep in her heart, that a miracle would happen. That maybe her Prince Charming would come on horseback and solve all their problems. During moments of rest, Clara often lost herself in daydreams while feeding the farm's horses. She fantasized about what it would be like to be loved by someone who could see beyond the difficulties of her life. She dreamed of someone who would bring not only financial salvation, but the kind of love she always read about in books and saw in movies. Deep down, this is what she desired most, to be seen and valued. One day, Emma, "A night will come and take us away from here," she said one time as she brushed her sister's long hair. Emma smiled weakly, her illness leaving her too frail to keep up with Clara's vivid dreams. "You're silly, Clara. Nights don't exist. But I'd love to see you happy like in your stories. Maybe someday." Clara kissed her sister's forehead tenderly, promising herself she would do everything to save her, even if the night of her dreams never appeared. The truth was that, as much as she believed in fairy tales, Clara knew that reality required sacrifices that were beyond her reach, and that silently consumed her every night as she watched her sister's health worsen. The pressure increased daily. The job at the store wasn't enough, and the medical bills were piling up. Her father, James, was aging rapidly due to the stress, and she knew he was also struggling to keep hope alive. "What are we going to do, Dad?" Clara asked one evening as they ate dinner by the dim light of the kitchen. "Emma needs that surgery soon. We can't wait any longer." James sighed, running his hand through his graying hair. "I don't know, Clara. All we can do is keep fighting. I'm looking for extra work, maybe. Maybe I'll find something, but it won't be enough in time." Clara closed her eyes, feeling a wave of despair. She knew they were racing against the clock, and Emma was getting weaker every day. Her dreams of horses and princes now seemed distant and unrealistic. Perhaps, she thought, the real miracle she needed wouldn't come in the form of knights, but from something unexpected. Nevertheless, Clara continued to believe in something greater, something that had yet to reveal itself. She didn't know how, but she felt deep in her heart that her life was about to change. The hardships she faced every day were paving the way for something new, something that could finally bring the salvation her family so desperately needed. And so, the young dreamer continued to live between the harsh reality of her obligations and her fervent desire for a better future. Fate, which had often been cruel, still had something in store for Clara, something she could never have imagined. The next morning, Clara woke up with a strange feeling of expectation in the air. It was an ordinary day, the sun shining over the fields and the horses running freely. Yet, as she went about her usual routine, something felt different. While feeding the horses, a luxurious black car pulled up in front of the farm. The driver, impeccably dressed in a suit, stepped out and walked towards Clara, who watched him curiously. She had never seen someone so well-dressed in that rural part of the world. "Miss Clara Weston?" the man asked, looking directly at her. Clara, not understanding what was happening, simply nodded. "My name is William. I've been sent by Edward Donovan. He would like to speak with you about a very important matter." Clara furrowed her brow, confused as to why a man as rich and powerful as Edward Donovan would care about her. The Donovan name was known by everyone in the region, but they lived in completely different worlds. "What's this about?" she asked, feeling her heart race. "I can't say more here, but I believe this meeting could change your life," William said with a slight smile, trying to reassure her. Clara looked out towards the horizon, at her simple home and her life full of struggles, then back at the man before her. Perhaps fate was indeed about to change. William, Edward Donovan's trusted lawyer, wasn't the kind of man who believed in coincidences. His work required precision, strategy, and above all, discretion. When Edward tasked him with finding a young woman of pure heart to marry Noah, William knew it would be a delicate and complex mission. He needed someone who wasn't driven by ambition, someone worthy of inheriting the Donovan fortune and caring for Noah with sincerity, even though the young businessman was trapped in a coma with no prediction of awakening. For days, William pondered how to fulfill this mission. Finding a young woman who met the criteria wouldn't be easy. He spent hours combing through records, searching for potential names from humble families, but none seemed to fit perfectly. Then, one quiet night, something unexpected happened. William was in his office late at night when a handwritten letter caught his attention. The correspondence wasn't addressed to him but to Edward Donovan and had been left among other documents. The envelope was simple, but upon opening it, William found a sincere and moving plea. The letter was from Clara Weston. She wrote asking for help, not for herself, but for her younger sister, Emma. The young woman was begging for a donation or any type of assistance to afford the surgery that could save her sister's life. The way Clara described the situation was deep and touching. She spoke with a clarity and desperation that William rarely saw. There was no trace of personal interest in her words, only a burning desire to save her sister's life. The letter began like this. "Mr. Donovan, my name is Clara Weston. I come to you not for myself, but for my sister Emma. She is gravely ill, and her only chance of survival is through a surgery that my father and I cannot afford. I write this letter with the hope that you, being a man of great heart and influence, could help us. Emma is only 15 years old and deserves a chance to live, to dream, to be happy. I know you must receive many requests like this, but I am willing to work, to do whatever it takes for my sister to have this chance. Thank you for your time, and with all my heart, I hope you can give us a glimmer of hope." William was impressed by the tone of the letter. Clara wasn't asking for easy money, nor was she using the usual flattery of those seeking financial help. She was offering her effort, her life, in exchange for the chance to save someone she loved. This was exactly the kind of character Edward was looking for. A young woman who valued family, who understood the weight of responsibility, and who, above all, was driven by love, not greed. In the following days, William investigated more about Clara. He discovered that the Weston family was known for their humility and decency. Her father, James, a hardworking man, did everything he could to support the family. Emma, the younger sister, was beloved by everyone in the community, but her fragile health prevented her from living a normal life. As for Clara, the stories were even more impressive. Neighbors and acquaintances described her as a dreamy young woman, passionate about horses and full of hope, despite the challenges she faced every day. Intrigued, William decided to dig deeper. He discreetly visited the small town where Clara lived and spoke to some people close to the Weston family. Every story he heard about Clara confirmed what he already suspected. She was the perfect choice for Edward's plan. One day, while passing by the Weston farm, William saw her for the first time. Clara was standing next to a white horse, stroking it with an almost magical tenderness. Her expression was one of pure devotion, and at that moment, William knew there couldn't be a more suitable person for what Edward needed. She was everything he was looking for: pure, sincere-hearted, but also strong and determined. Clara Weston wasn't seeking fame or fortune. She lived with one foot in the real world and another in her dreams, believing, against all odds, that someday something or someone would change her life for the better. And William knew that day was coming. Back at Edward Donovan's office, William waited for the right moment to share his discovery. He knew Edward was anxious for a solution, and Clara Weston's name would be like a ray of hope amid the chaos. "Mr. Donovan, I believe I've found the right young woman," William said as Edward looked at him expectantly. "Who is she?" Edward asked, his voice rough from the illness consuming him. William placed Clara's letter on the table, carefully, as if it were destiny materialized on that piece of paper. "Her name is Clara Weston. She's a 20-year-old woman, living in a small rural town with her father and younger sister, who is gravely ill. Clara wrote this letter asking for help to save her sister's life, and I couldn't help but notice the sincerity in her words. She doesn't ask for herself, sir. She is willing to make any sacrifice to save her sister, and I believe she could be the answer we've been looking for." Edward took the letter and read it in silence. His expression slowly changed from skepticism to a softer look, as if he finally saw a solution taking shape. "She seems too good to be true, William," Edward said, still with some hesitation. "I did my research. She's exactly the kind of person we're looking for. Humble, hardworking, and from all accounts, pure-hearted. There's no sign of greed or self-interest in her letter. I believe Clara Weston can be Noah's salvation and the safeguard for your legacy." Edward closed his eyes for a moment, thinking about all he had lost and the little time he had left. He knew William was right. This young woman, Clara, might be the only hope to ensure Noah was in good hands. "Then bring her to me," Edward finally said with quiet resolve. "Let's see if fate has indeed chosen her to be part of our family." Clara looked suspiciously at the shiny black car parked at the entrance of her humble farm. The driver, with his impeccable posture and air of sophistication, seemed out of place in that rural setting. William, the lawyer, stepped forward, extending his hand in a cordial gesture. "Miss Weston, as I mentioned, Mr. Donovan would like to speak with you personally. Please, get in the car and I'll take you to him. I assure you, it will be a conversation of utmost importance for your family." Clara took a step back, her heart racing. She had never been confronted with something like this before. Despite William's polite demeanor, there was something deeply unsettling about the situation. The offer seemed too good to be true, and Clara had always learned that things that seemed easy often came with a heavy price. I can't go with you," Clara responded, raising her hands nervously. "I don't know you. I don't know this Mr. Donovan, and I'm not getting in that car." William frowned, realizing he would need to change his approach. He was used to dealing with suspicion, especially in delicate situations like this, but he couldn't let Clara slip away without understanding the gravity of the proposal. "I understand your hesitation, William said in a softer tone. Let me be honest with you, Clara. Mr. Donovan is very ill, and his son, Noah, is in a coma, declared beyond recovery by the doctors. He wants to ensure his son is taken care of, and he believes you may be the right person for that. Mr. Donovan wishes for you to marry Noah, and in return, he will provide everything your family needs. Your sister's surgery, the care your father deserves. It will be a new life for you all. Clara's eyes widened, shocked by the proposal she had just heard. Marry a man in a coma? The idea seemed absurd, almost like a bad joke. Are you joking with me? Clara crossed her arms, feeling a wave of disbelief. I can't just marry someone I don't know, and much less someone who is like that. This is insane. I understand it sounds strange, William said, maintaining his calm. But I'm asking you to think about it, Clara. I'm not expecting an answer now. I just want you to consider what this could mean for you and your family. This is an opportunity that few people have. I know it's not an easy decision, but I also know your sister's situation is dire, and this proposal could save her life. I'll return in a week. Give yourself time to think. Clara didn't respond immediately, only shaking her head in disbelief. The lawyer returned to the car, left his business card in her hand, and the vehicle disappeared down the dirt road. The proposal echoed in her mind as she walked back to the house, her heart heavy. That night, as the sun was setting, Clara called her father into the kitchen to talk about what had happened. Dad, something happened today, she began, feeling a lump in her throat. James, sitting at the table with a tired expression, looked up at his daughter. What is it, my dear? You look troubled. Clara took a deep breath before telling him everything. Every word came out heavy, as if she were unloading a burden she could hardly understand. When she finished, the silence in the kitchen was suffocating. James, a proud and honest man, looked at his daughter with an expression mixed with anger and shock. This is madness, he exclaimed, slamming his hand on the table. Marry a man you've never met? A man in a coma, no less? That's no life for you, Clara. They want to buy you. That's what this is. They think they can use our desperation. I won't let you accept something like this. Clara tried to argue, her voice low and trembling. Dad, they can save Emma. You know, we don't have the money for the surgery, and her time is running out. No, James interrupted, rising from the table. I'd rather see this farm fall to pieces than sell my daughter to those rich people. We'll find another way. But you're not accepting that proposal, Clara. Not while I'm alive. Clara fell silent, but deep down the lawyer's words echoed in her mind. This could save your sister. She knew her father was trying to protect her dignity, but she also knew Emma's condition was worsening every day. As James climbed the stairs to go to bed, Clara remained seated at the table, staring at nothing as the night advanced. The days passed slowly, but for Clara, time seemed to be racing faster and faster. She watched her sister lying in bed, her face pale and fragile, her breathing becoming shorter. With each cough from Emma, Clara's heart tightened, and the weight of responsibility became unbearable. Her father refused to speak any more about the proposal, ignoring the brutal realities the family was facing. On the second-to-last day before the lawyer's return, Clara sat in the field, watching the horses run freely. The sound of hooves hitting the ground calmed her, but her thoughts were far away. She knew she had no choice. Emma was deteriorating, and the farm could no longer support the family. What remained was a harsh reality. Accepting William's proposal was the only way to save her sister and take the burden off her father's shoulders. Clara didn't want to admit it, but the image of Emma, weak and sick, haunted her. That night after dinner, Clara gathered the courage to speak with her father again. The atmosphere was tense, but she knew she couldn't delay any longer. Dad, I've made a decision, she said, looking directly at him. James stared at her, knowing exactly what was coming next. His expression hardened. I won't allow it, Clara. I've already told you what I think about this. Clara felt the tears well up in her eyes, but she remained firm. I know what you said, Dad, but Emma is getting worse. If we don't do something, she won't survive. And I can't let that happen. I'm going to accept the proposal, even if it's against your will. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. James lowered his head, his hands trembling with anger and frustration. So, you're sacrificing yourself for something that shouldn't be your burden, he whispered, his voice full of pain. "This isn't what I raised you for, Clara." "I know, Dad, but it's what I have to do. For Emma. For you." The tears finally spilled down her face. James didn't respond, slowly rising and leaving the room, leaving Clara alone with her choices and the weight of her decision. She knew there was no turning back now. Deep down, her hope of being rescued by a prince on horseback had vanished. But if her decision could save her sister and ease her father's burden, then she would make the sacrifice. Even if it cost her own happiness, her fate was sealed. The day Clara signed the marriage documents was filled with a mix of emotions. Her hand trembled slightly as she held the pen, fully aware of what the act meant. She was now officially the wife of Noah Donovan, a man she had never met, who was trapped in a deep coma. The decision still weighed on her, but something stronger drove her: the hope of saving her sister and helping her family. William was by her side as the paperwork was finalized, and shortly after, Clara was taken to the Donovan mansion. She could hardly believe that this would be her new home. The enormous iron gate slowly opened, revealing an imposing building surrounded by immaculate gardens. Everything seemed straight out of a fairy tale, but Clara didn't feel like the protagonist of a happy story. Upon entering the mansion, she was led to the room where Noah rested. She took a deep breath before opening the door, uncertain about what she would find. As she crossed the threshold, her eyes locked onto the man lying in the bed. Noah, even unconscious, was stunning. His pale skin contrasted with his dark hair, which fell gently over his forehead. His face, with strong, striking features, looked like it belonged to a prince from a distant dream. Clara approached slowly, her heart racing. She found herself comparing him to the princes she had imagined countless times in the romance novels she read in her youth. He seemed so serene, so untouchable, and for a brief moment, Clara allowed herself to imagine how things might have been if they had met under different circumstances. "He's so handsome," she whispered to herself, surprised by the unexpected feeling in such a complicated moment. Shaking her head, she pushed those thoughts aside, reminding herself of the real reason she was there: to take care of him. In the days that followed, Clara embraced her new responsibility with care and dedication. She spent her mornings cleaning Noah's room, arranging the pillows around him, and ensuring that everything was spotless. Every afternoon, she read books aloud to him, hoping that, in some way, her words would reach him. At night, she held his hand and spoke softly, telling him about her life, about Emma, and about her dreams, even though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. Every little gesture was filled with care. Clara fed him through a tube with delicate precision, massaged his hands, and adjusted the blankets when the night turned cold. As the days passed, she became more and more attached to him, even though she had never heard his voice or seen his eyes open. There was something about Noah that touched her deeply. Despite her dedication, Clara couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. The mansion was enormous, and although the staff was kind, she couldn't help but feel that she was alone in a world that didn't belong to her. Edward's absence, as he too was gravely ill, only deepened her sense of being unprotected. It didn't take long for Noah's brothers, Mark and John, to find out about the marriage. When they did, the atmosphere in the mansion became tense. They didn't see Clara in a favorable light, believing she was an opportunist, trying to take advantage of the family's fortune. What they didn't know was that Clara felt just as uncomfortable as they did. One afternoon, while Clara was preparing Noah's room for the night, the door suddenly swung open with force, and Mark entered abruptly, followed by John. Their faces were filled with disdain, and the silence in the air was heavy. "So you're the famous Clara Weston," Mark began, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The humble young woman who married our brother, who, by the way, is in a coma. What's your real goal here?" Clara felt her stomach churn with nerves but maintained her calm. She tried to respond with serenity, although she knew that nothing she said would convince them. "I'm only here to care for Noah," she said quietly. "Care for Noah?" John repeated with a bitter laugh. "You think you can fool us? We know exactly what you're after, the fortune. But let me warn you, girl, we're not gonna let that happen. This mansion and the money are not for you." Clara felt the weight of their words, as if they were stripping away what little control she still had. Their imposing presence made her heart race with fear, and she felt utterly unprotected. But despite the fear, something inside her remained strong. She knew she was there for Noah, for a cause greater than her own life. "I'm not here for the money. I'm here because I made a promise," she responded, trying to sound firm. Before the argument could escalate further, one of the staff members hurried into the room, interrupting the tension in the air. The brothers left, but Clara knew they would return, and the tension between them would only increase over time. That night, Clara sat beside Noah, as usual. She held his hand, gently massaging it while she spoke softly about the day. The atmosphere was calm, except for the faint sounds of the machines monitoring Noah's vital signs. Suddenly, something broke the monotony of that moment. Noah's hand twitched slightly, a movement almost imperceptible, but enough to make Clara stop mid-sentence. Her heart raced. "Noah?" she whispered, her eyes wide with surprise. Another movement. His fingers twitched again. Clara quickly stood up, her heart pounding, barely believing what she was seeing. Noah's breathing seemed to change, becoming deeper, more regular. Then, slowly, his eyes opened, blinking against the soft light in the room. "What? Who are you?" His voice came out hoarse and weak, but Clara heard each word clearly. She froze for a second, unsure how to respond. The doctors, alerted by the monitoring team, rushed into the room, their faces expressing as much shock as hers. It was a miracle. They could barely believe Noah had woken up after so long. "Who is she?" Noah repeated, his expression confused, as the doctors examined his condition. Clara's heart pounded even harder. There he was, awake, alive, but with no idea of what had happened. The surprise was evident on everyone's faces, including the doctors. And in that moment, Clara realized that everything was about to change. Noah felt confused and exhausted after waking up from a coma that seemed to have lasted an eternity. His body was still weak and his mind clouded. When the doctors finally explained the situation, the accident, the coma, and the marriage arranged while he was unconscious, he was perplexed. Facing Clara, the young woman who was now legally his wife, he didn't hide his irritation. It all seemed like a cruel joke. "So this is it," he said dryly, eyeing Clara from head to toe. "My father, in his infinite wisdom, decided that you would be the woman I should have by my side." He gave a bitter laugh, looking up at the ceiling as if trying to make sense of the absurd situation. "Let's make one thing clear. I didn't agree to this. And you, Clara, will stay here only for as long as necessary until everything is sorted out. After that, I expect you to leave and move on with your life." Clara, who had been kind and caring up until that point, felt a wave of indignation rise within her. How could he speak to her that way? She hadn't asked for any of this, and she certainly wasn't after Noah's money or the Donovan family fortune. "I didn't come looking for you," she replied, her voice firm as she met Noah's gaze without fear. "Your father and the lawyer came to me. I was trying to save my sister's life, and the last thing I wanted was to get involved in this mess. I didn't choose this, but I made a sacrifice. So if you think I'm here to take advantage, you're very wrong." Noah frowned, surprised by Clara's boldness. He hadn't expected her to react that way. He was used to people bowing to him, but Clara wasn't like that. Despite the discomfort, he kept his tone cold. "It doesn't matter what the reasons are. You're here now, but you won't be for much longer. As soon as everything is settled, we'll go our separate ways." Clara felt a lump in her throat, but stood firm. His words hurt her deeply, but she wouldn't let Noah see her fragile state. She simply nodded, turning her back and leaving the room, leaving Noah alone with his thoughts. But inside, his words wounded her more than she wanted to admit. A few days later, a grand party was organized at the Donovan mansion. Clara was forced to attend, knowing her presence was merely for appearances. Since Noah had awakened, he had been avoiding her, rarely exchanging words, and when he did, it was with coldness and indifference. That night, Clara felt more out of place than ever. Noah was at the center of attention, surrounded by wealthy and influential guests. He completely ignored her, as if she didn't exist. Even though she had accepted her role as a temporary wife, it hurt her deeply. Every laugh she heard, every conversation she was excluded from, made her feel more alone. Desperate to distract herself from her feelings, Clara began to drink. First, a glass of wine, then another, until the alcohol started to take effect, numbing the pain but also causing her to lose control. She tried to keep herself composed, but the feelings of rejection and disillusionment finally overwhelmed her. Noah noticed something was wrong when he saw Clara stumbling across the room, clearly intoxicated. He sighed in irritation and approached her, grabbing her by the arm. "That's enough, Clara. You're drunk," he said, his tone filled with irritation mixed with a concern he didn't want to show. She laughed, a bitter laugh. "I'm drunk? But you know what?" Clara pulled her arm from Noah's grasp and looked at him, her eyes full of pain. "I'm tired of being invisible to you, Noah. I'm not a burden you have to carry, but that's how you treat me. I didn't ask for this, but here I am, and you don't even see me." Noah, not in the mood for a scene in public, grabbed her arm again, guiding her out of the party. He led her to her room, battling his frustration. Once they reached the room, Clara, still stumbling, fell onto the bed. Noah watched her, feeling a mixture of irritation and something else, something he didn't want to admit. "You should lie down and sleep," he said, trying to end the situation quickly. But Clara wasn't ready to stay silent. The walls she had kept up for so long crumbled under the influence of alcohol and the sadness that consumed her. "Do you want to know why I stayed here?" she murmured, her voice slurred but filled with emotion. "Because when I saw you for the first time, I fell in love." She laughed at herself, at the circumstances. "You were lying in that bed, looking like a prince, and even though I didn't know you, didn't hear your voice, I felt something. I read to you, sang to you, because somehow I hoped you would wake up and see me, truly see me, but you woke up and all you did was despise me." Noah stood still, Clara's words echoing in the silence of the room. He didn't know what to say. He felt a mix of surprise and confusion. On one hand, he was shaken by her sincerity, but on the other, he didn't know how to deal with it. "Clara," he began, but she interrupted him. "I fell in love with the man I imagined you to be, and now I see that maybe I was wrong, but..." She looked him in the eyes, her expression sincere and vulnerable. "I didn't lie. I took care of you because I wanted you to come back, because I wanted to know you, and now, I don't know what to do anymore." Clara's confession hit Noah hard. He hadn't expected any of this. He had always seen her as someone distant, a figure there out of obligation. But realizing that she felt something for him, something real and deep, made him question his own feelings. Sitting beside her, he looked at her closely, feeling his heart waver in a way he didn't understand. "Clara, Noah tried to find the words, but he was lost. He had always been a practical man, guided by logic and business. But here, in this moment, he didn't know what to say or do. Clara, overwhelmed by alcohol and pain, closed her eyes and fell asleep, her tears still fresh on her face. Noah watched her, the weight of her words still heavy on his mind. He sighed, covered her with the blanket, and left the room, but her words echoed in his thoughts, bringing a new restlessness he couldn't ignore. In the days that followed, Noah couldn't stop thinking about what Clara had said. He watched her from a distance, seeing how she continued to care for everything with the same dedication, despite his rude behavior. Slowly, he began to notice the small things he had ignored before. The way she looked at him, how she spoke with the staff, the attentive way she took care of the house's details. What had once seemed like a forced situation now made him question everything. Noah, a man who had always controlled everything around him, felt lost amidst the new feelings that began to emerge. Clara, on the other hand, tried to keep her emotional distance, but each gesture from Noah confused her. There was something changing in him, a softness she had never seen before. And the more time passed, the more she realized that maybe, just maybe, Noah could feel the same way about her. Slowly, Noah began to understand that the love Clara felt for him had planted something in his heart, something he had never imagined he could feel. 2 days after the party, Clara made a decision that had been growing in her heart since the night she confessed her feelings to Noah. Despite the deep emotions she had developed for him, her presence at the Donovan mansion felt more and more like a burden. Noah was changing. That was true, but the discomfort between them was palpable, and Clara could no longer bear the uncertainty and pain. So, in the stillness of a quiet morning, while everyone was still asleep, Clara packed her few belongings and left the mansion without saying goodbye. The fresh morning air brought a sense of relief, but also a weight on her chest. She knew that by leaving, she was not only walking away from the mansion, but also leaving behind a part of herself that would never be the same again. Clara took the first bus back to her small town, to her old life. There was no certainty about what the future held for her, but one thing was clear: she could no longer stay in a place where she didn't truly belong. Noah didn't notice Clara's absence until later that day. At first, he didn't give it much thought, assuming she was simply avoiding him as she had been since the party. But when he went to her room and found it empty, a wave of panic hit him. Clara was gone. Although he tried to rationalize the situation, telling himself it was better this way, Noah couldn't deny the emptiness he felt since she left. The house, which had always been his fortress, now felt cold and hollow. The days that followed were a true test for Noah. He tried to go back to his life as before, but Clara's absence was deeper than he had expected. Noah, a man used to controlling everything around him, now found himself emotionally unraveling. He remembered the words she had spoken that night, how she had confessed her feelings for him. The pain in her eyes wouldn't leave his mind. And, little by little, he began to realize how much Clara meant to him. The days dragged on. Each morning, Noah felt Clara's absence like an open wound. The sound of her voice, the gentle touch of her hands as she cared for him, even her stubbornness. All the things he had ignored or avoided now became impossible to forget. He resisted admitting to himself what he was feeling. He tried to bury himself in work, as he had done before, attempting to drown out the emptiness. But Clara wasn't something that could be erased from his mind. Every corner of the mansion seemed to remind him of her presence. The way she arranged the flowers in the entrance hall, the small changes she made to the garden, the books she read to him while he was unconscious. Finally, on a quiet night, Noah came to the truth. He loved her. And in realizing that, he knew he couldn't let her go. Clara had been his healing, the bridge to the world he hadn't known he needed. He needed her. Not because she took care of him or because she was legally his wife. He needed her because, without her, his life was incomplete. The woman he had once avoided and disregarded had become the center of everything he desired. Determined, Noah got into his car and drove to the small town where Clara had returned. He knew exactly where to find her, at the small farm she loved so much, with her sister and father. The journey felt longer than he had imagined, his heart pounding as he thought about what he would say. When he finally arrived, he parked the car with his heart in his throat. Clara was outside, tending to one of the horses. He watched her for a moment, seeing how at peace she seemed in that rural setting. But at the same time, there was a sadness in the air, something he couldn't ignore. Clara saw him approaching and was surprised. She hadn't expected to see him there, and for a moment, the silence between them was filled with uncertainty. Noah took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Clara," he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard before. "I made a mistake. A big mistake." She turned to face him completely, unsure of what to expect. "I thought that if you left, everything would go back to normal, that the life I had before I met you would be enough. But I was wrong. Since you left..." He paused, searching for the right words. "I realized that you've become part of everything that matters to me, and without you, nothing makes sense." Clara frowned, still cautious. She loved him, that was certain, but there was so much between them that had been left unsaid, so many wounds still open. "What do you want from me, Noah?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "I want you to marry me. Not out of obligation or as part of a deal, but because I love you." He swallowed hard, the words coming out with a sincerity he hadn't known he was capable of expressing. "Because I want a life with you, Clara. I want to get to know you, truly, and be the person you deserve. Give me that chance." Clara's heart raced at those words. It was what she had always wanted to hear, but even so, part of her was afraid of being hurt again. She looked at Noah, and for a long moment, let the silence speak. But deep in her heart, Clara knew she loved him too. And despite all the uncertainties, she knew she couldn't deny what she felt. "Do you promise me, Noah," she asked, her voice full of emotion, "that you won't make me feel the way I did before? That we'll really build something together?" He nodded without hesitation. "I promise, Clara. I promise that this time I'll do things the right way." Clara took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with tears, and then, in a gesture of trust, she extended her hand to him. "Then yes, I'll marry you. For real this time." Noah smiled, his heart relieved. He pulled her close, hugging her tightly, as if he had finally found the peace he had been searching for. And for the first time, both knew they were on the right path to building a life together. A life based on love, respect, and the true partnership they had always sought.